Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, given where you are plugging in from. I am Dr. Narayan, and I'm super excited to moderate this next segment with Dr. Elizabeth Stanton as the speaker. And we're going to ask some questions and talk about preparing for the much dreaded EPPP. I wanted to quickly, just a few things, a quick shout out to Michele Haley and her amazing team for putting this whole day together. I think these are amazing topics. I wish I had this while preparing for my EPPP, while applying for internships. Great set of topics for today. So thank you so much to the team for putting this together. Thank you, Jenny, for that much needed movement break. I think those were such amazing exercises. I am going to use some of those while working remotely. So thank you so much for those for that movement break. And just some quick reminders, please feel free to post questions. We do have questions that we're going to ask Dr. Stanton today, but if there are any comments, please do use the chat box and we'll try to get to them as time permits. Our section is for 45 minutes, so we'll try to get to as much as we can during that time. And with that, it's my absolute honor and privilege to introduce Dr. Elizabeth Stanton. I was looking at your resume, Dr. Stanton, and it just humbled me to see all the accolades that you have under your name. You are a licensed psychologist, and you've been a supervisor in the student life, and the department chair, a vice president for academics. And in the past 12 years, Dr. Stanton has worked to promote accessible quality learning and student access to higher education. And as an immigrant from India, I have a lot of respect for higher education. I think it is something that needs a lot of focus, and that's great that that is something that you work on and passionate about as well. Currently, Dr. Stanton has her private practice in San Diego and supports individual couples and families. Also serves as an instructor, coach, and content developer for Triad Behavioral Health. So with that, let's start. Let's get Dr. Stanton. How are you doing today, Dr. Stanton?
I'm well, thank you. It's always weird when you're hearing about yourself, right? I'm like, no, don't talk about me. But thank you, though. Thank you for that warm welcome. And I'm well. I'm excited to talk about the EPPP as well. Like you said, it's the most dreaded part of this process, but there are ways to get prepared for sure. So I'm glad we did about it.
Absolutely, absolutely. So should we get started with some of the questions?
Yeah, go for it. What you pick?
Yeah, so to begin with, maybe if you could just, what is EPPP and what does it consist of?
Yes, so the EPPP is the exam for professional practice in psychology. And no one ever calls it that either, right? I even had to think about it like, wait, what does it stand for again? But yes, the exam for professional practice, and thinking of it in that way, right? The idea is that we're going to take this exam, and it's one of the steps to make sure that we're prepared to do no harm and care for our patients. But the exam is a 225 question, multiple choice question exam. There's 175 of those questions that are scored, and then there's 50 experimental questions. I'll probably say this again at some point, but just as a note, when you are preparing for the exam, always remind yourself that there are 50 experimental questions. So I always say you want to be wrong at least 50 times, because those questions it's information that you've never seen before. And one thing about it that's interesting is because they're randomly included in the exam, you could actually start the exam with like 5 experimental questions and start off feeling like you have no idea what you're talking about, which isn't always the best feeling. However, it does include those experimental questions, obviously, for later, but just note those 50 that can kind of throw you off your rocker if you're not prepared to know that should be there. You should feel like you're wrong. One day I'll sit on the board of psychology somewhere and I'll fight against that, because why would they set us up like that? But anyway, and then you need a passing score of 500 out of that 175 questions, a passing score of 500. And that number is, I know like in New York and some states, they scale the score, they'll convert it. And so that number could be slightly different. So it may be either between 70 and 75, but typically it's a 70% and then 500 for the score, which when you think of it, is a C. So probably for everyone watching, it'll be the first time in your entire life that you strived for a C. That's it. Like, that's the highest score you want to get. It doesn't matter. The exam they allow you 4 hours and 15 minutes to complete the exam, which is more than enough time to work your way through that many questions, even have time to come back and review some, and of course, take a break or two in between. And then at the end of the exam, you're provided with an unofficial score report right away. So that's relieving, and that, you get that information and are able to go to the next step. But that is the exam itself. And you want me to talk a little bit about what it consists of in terms of the topics and domains?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Perfect. I know that's one of the questions too. And so the content of the EPPP, there's 8 different domains. And the first is the biological basis of behavior. And they break each of these down into percentages in terms of how much you can expect to see those in terms of questions on the exam. So biological basis is about 10%, not too much. Then there's cognitive and affective basis of behavior. Now, this would be things like learning theory, memory comes in there. When we talk about even some of the social psychology components are kind of in there as well. So that's another thing to think of when you're preparing some of these terms. You might think like, well, wait, I don't know about that, but we have a combination of knowledge that pours into that overall topic. And then there's also social and cultural basis of behavior, which would then be, getting the social piece and the cultural. There's growth and lifespan development, assessment and diagnosis, treatment, intervention, prevention, and supervision, research methods and statistics, everyone's favorite, and then ethics and legal and professional issues. Now, out of those, the percentages aren't that important, but the big thing to know is that they break it down into basically like 3 different categories of information for the exam. And so you have category A, B, and C. And category A includes abnormal psychology, clinical psychology, and ethics. So those are like the big heavy hitters for the exam. That makes up about 45% of the entire EPPP. And then category B consists of the, there's a few in there. There's lifespan development, learning theory, industrial and organizational psych, and then physiological and psychopharm, which would be that biological basis piece. And category B makes up 40% of the exam. So one thing about that is we really focus a lot on the ethics, clinical, and abnormal, but I always make a note to say, don't, fall short or forget about the importance of lifespan and then physiological basis and psychopharm. Lifespan is, it's one of the larger domains in terms of the amount of information because there's so many different theories, et cetera. And so that's one, if you're trying to weigh out, where to put your focus, to consider that, even though it's a part of that category B. And then category C are the fun ones, right? Statistics and research design, test construction, social psychology fits under there, and then psychological assessment, which makes up about 15% of the exam. So when you, again, consider the parts that usually tend to be a little bit more challenging for us are in that 15%. So it's not that it's not important. We want to study for it, but we don't necessarily have to be as concerned. So if stats makes you cringe, it's okay. You'll just want to know enough to be able to answer some questions. Then that's basically the gist of the exam itself.
Great. Wow. Thank you so much for that. I love the perspective on just think about it as a C. I think that just even hearing that can kind of provide a little bit of how to kind of place that in a larger space, because and we'll come to that, but also when we talk about balancing the EPPP with other aspects of our life. The next question is more focused on what are your views on the upcoming years and the EPPP's approach, especially with the third part of the EPPP, this whole conversation about including that. And so what are your views on that? Well, it's interesting, as we have the EPPP, and then everyone has their I can't say the word today, jurisprudence exam, or their ethics part for their state, right? But then there's the EPPP 2 that hasn't rolled out in all of the states yet, which is a good thing. And that's more of the application
piece of the exam. And so in some of the sample questions that I've seen for it, it presents like it's there's 4 right answers, but there's one that's going to be the most competent answer, right? So you have sometimes the most correct with perhaps the EPPP, but then this is like, what would be the most competent clinician answer? And so it's kind of, I don't think it's something to fear in terms of content, right? Because it's the information that you'll already be studying for the exam. I think the only thing that may be a challenge is adjusting to one more layer of things that we have to prepare for, right? And so and then in adding anything else to it, I don't know how soon that would be for anyone who's in graduate school now. I think just thinking about the EPPP possibly, and depending on where you are, that could already be happening. But and that because it's going to take a while before everyone even adjusts to this second part of the EPPP. Many states haven't adopted it yet, and those that have, I haven't heard back. You know, it's been like only in this first year, so I'm not sure. I know there were a lot of people that had some issues with it, and then, you know, my thing is just that it's an additional cost, which, you know, you want to prepare for that. And then it's set up where you have to do them in order, you know, pass the EPPP and then pass the next part. So I guess it's just thinking about that extra piece of it, but not to be afraid of it, right? I mean, it's just going to be another step, but it's okay.
Right, absolutely. Yeah, that's a great reminder. Some examples of what EPPP questions look like.
Yes, I actually have some here. This is now I don't know if the technology would make it easy or not. I could share a screen of questions or I could read them. What do you think would be the easiest, Dr.
I would imagine maybe just reading them.
Probably keep it simple. Yeah. I'm cool with that. That works. Okay. So there are a couple of different types of questions, right? You're going to have the factual question where you just need to know the definition of something. And then you'll have a question where it's more of a synthesis of things, right? So there may be something from, say, biological basis of behavior, and then also a cognitive affective component, right? And you have to try to decipher what is actually the most correct answer. The questions like the duration of sensory memory is A, milliseconds to seconds, B, several seconds to several minutes, C, days to years, or D, initially infinite. Does anybody know? Anybody in the chat want to give it a go?
Yeah, give it a try.
So the duration of sensory memory, is it milliseconds to seconds, several seconds to several minutes, days to years, or essentially infinite? Well, I could always just give you the answer. I have more questions. I don't know if anybody's going.
I don't think anyone, yeah.
So the answer to this would be milliseconds to seconds. And here is where this is a good one to look at. I wish you could see it. But so they have milliseconds to seconds as an option. And then D, the last option, was essentially infinite. So the space of the sensory memory, like the capacity of sensory memory, is basically infinite, but the duration of it is limited to milliseconds or seconds. And so that's where knowing, what the question is asking and paying attention to that part. Oh, it said people are answering. Oh, maybe I'm in the wrong chat. Oh, thank you. I was in the wrong.
Oh, yeah.
No worries. See, this is good. You guys answered correct. Thank you very much. Random guess works too, but it is milliseconds to seconds. I'm glad that you guys are in there. So hopefully that explanation helps, but I'm glad we're answering. I got some more. So also, okay, good. I saw that, Brenda. It makes sense, right? When you think, so we want duration or space. And when you do go through in terms of memory, and obviously I won't go into all that now, but those are things that we know that stuff. This is just a polishing of those specifics of the timing, etc. And then you get it. Here's another one. A female client says that she frequently misperceives things, and this has made her anxious about leaving home. For example, she thinks she sees small animals at work when in fact the animals are actually inanimate objects such as books, coffee mugs, and office supplies. The woman's misperceptions are best described as A, illusions, B, delusions, C, hallucinations, or D, depersonalization. I'll go through the answers again. A, illusions, B, delusions, C, hallucinations, or D, depersonalization.
So we have B coming up.
I see. Oh, got some there.
And a D.
I love it.
Okay, and then a
All
C.
right.
So it's not an illusion.
This is it. Actually, the correct answer is A. It's an illusion. Yes, it's an illusion. Now, when hearing this is what we want to differentiate. And I saw a lot of you would put B, delusion, right? Your first thought, like, what? She sees something that's not there. Well, there's a difference when we see something that's not there, or if there's a belief in something that doesn't exist. So, okay, and so the delusion would be that there wasn't an object that she was changing into something else. But because it's an inanimate object that she is perceiving as something else, makes it an illusion, right? If I'm going to give you an illusion, I'm going to perceive to be one thing, but then I'm actually going to be something different. So that's where the illusion comes in. The delusion would be if she just simply believed that animals were in her office space, or that she saw animals at work even though they really weren't there. That would be the delusion. And then the hallucination would be in the sense of that she is hallucinating that something is happening, right? That she's talking to the animals, etc. And then I saw depersonalization on there as well. And when we think about depersonalization or derealization disorder, is that disassociation piece, right? And that isn't in here. She's not disassociating necessarily. So the fact that she's the object piece is where she's seeing something and making it something else makes it an illusion. But that was a good one though, right? Kind of tricky.
That was a good. Absolutely. Yeah.
You want another one?
Yeah.
Was that good? I mean, I got questions for days, but I think that gives you a good example of the type of questions.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I also like with what you were sharing, Dr. Stanton, like to kind of practice it through examples and maybe coming up with something that you can relate to when it comes to these terms, because they're so close in definitions.
Yes.
So having an example really helps with understanding that.
Well, and that's a good point as well. When it comes to this, I always want to encourage people. Yes, we are, professionals, and when we're presenting something in, paper or professionally, we're going to use examples that make sense and align and right. But when you're studying for the EPPP, you use whatever makes sense. So even if it doesn't even really match with the definition, or someone else would be like, that's not it. If it helps you remember it, who cares? You don't have to attach it to people or behaviors of people, just to make those connections. That associative learning is super helpful, because a lot of this isn't a part of our everyday conversation yet. It will become, but it just, so that's another thing. And with the questions as well, how this one had, delusions, hallucinations, there's a way to maximize the question experiences every time where you're looking at the other options to see what those definitions are. Make sure we don't just, did I get it right? And then go to the next one, say, well, okay, wait a minute, what are those other things? And then perhaps if the question has a way that you can reword it to say, okay, if the question said this instead, and then you even get to maximize in terms of the question, like, we may present it one way in study materials, but then you get to twist it in the ways that may be in the actual EPPP as well. So that's all.
Absolutely.
I signed up the sessions just on quizzing. I know, right? We might have to work that out, Brenda.
Absolutely. Yeah. Moving on, Dr. Stanton, how can our viewers plan for applying and studying for licensure? Any tips?
Yes. Well, one of the most important things in preparation for studying for the EPPP and applying for licensure is organization. I would say two things: being informed and being organized. Depending again on your state, for instance, and where you're going to be licensed. There's various rules that just small things, nuances that change between different states, and making sure that you're aware of those. I made it kind of a point to become like best friends with the Board of Psychology website. So I just would check it regularly, so I knew where things were, and as updates came up and things like that, just so you're aware. Even if you're not going to be working on licensure for a while, it's still nice to just start to get familiar with the website that you're going to be engaging with probably for the rest of your life anyway. So, but it's good to just to always have that information, because everyone has really good intentions, but not everyone has the most up-to-date information. And I found that even to be true in my even graduate programs. Not everyone had the most, and so you don't want to just when would we do that anyway, right? We are taught to be skeptical, so we want to always go back and get the information. So be organized and be informed, and then plan it out so that whatever your goal is for licensure, sometimes people are going to transition from being an intern to an employee, and or they have so much time that they can work as whatever their position is without being licensed. And so if a person is in that kind of situation, then planning it out to say, okay, if I know I have to be licensed by this time, not just how much time it's going to take for you to study, but then also being considerate of the time that it takes for the turnaround of processes within the state, which of course have been extended slightly due to our, pandemic situation. So being thoughtful of all of those things, that there's a little bit of wiggle room that'll be necessary.
Absolutely. That's such a great way to look at it. So start planning for it a year ahead.
Absolutely.
Because also you're also in the same year defending your dissertation and getting applications to internships. So kind of planning this a little ahead of time really gives a little bit of wiggle room there. Thank you so much for that perspective.
One other thing too, you can use, I'm thinking like before I say this, but I'm pretty sure it's in all states. Once you have 1,500 hours complete, you can sign up to take the EPPP. So noting that as well, when you mentioned dissertation and internship, I thought, yes, you want to, make sure that you're thinking about when you can actually take it as well, and maximize that moment, so that if there's other things happening, you know what I mean, in terms of finishing your hours, you can work on that and then have it. I think you have to be graduated though and have your 1,500 hours done. So then that way you could have that piece and then finish up your 1,500 hours at maybe even, doing something different, having that done, or just having that time freed up that it's out the way.
Great. Absolutely. Wonderful. Now, more specific to the AATBS, Dr. Stanton, how can AATBS help prepare students for the EPPP?
Well, okay, so of course I'm a little bit biased. I do work with AATBS and also Taylor Study Method, just Triad Behavioral Health in general, and there's different study programs available. And AATBS is our, most long-standing program. I think AATBS has been around for like 40 plus years. It's pretty, they're all legit, but it's, it's like the senior player. But with AATBS, it offers you a variety of different resources in preparation. I really like the coaching aspect that's available with the study programs. And the reason being is because then you get someone who's able to walk you through and help you throughout the process. So if you're totally, I have no idea what I'm doing, not only can you get the information to be that organized, informed, person, but then also to maybe even address some of the angst and anxiety early on about the exam and what's, just what to expect. So that service in terms of the coaching piece is tremendous. But then in terms of like what is available with AATBS, there's, and this is, as I'm saying this, I'm thinking when we think AATBS, you could think Triad, right? Because they have programs all include these various things, but we'll use AATBS as our star. And included in that are obviously, study materials where you go through each of the topics by those domains that we were discussing. And it's organized in a way that you focus really on the bigger parts of the EPPP. There's information for everything, but you start off with the bigger parts. And then as you work your way through the materials, you'll see that we really rely on that primacy and recency theory of memory. So we want that to kind of be the focus, you're beginning and ending with those larger parts. But basically, you start off with an assessment program, or I'm sorry, an assessment exam. And then from there, you're able to, a few things are included. You want to take the assessment exam, but then thinking about how much time do I have to study? So there's a very organized study plan that's prepared depending on how much time you have. So is it 2 months, 3 months, 15 weeks, whatever the case is. And then the study plan is very outlined in a way that, okay, this day I'm doing this, I have this many days to do these lessons, I have this many days to do these lessons. And the cool thing about AATBS is that it offers not just the study volumes in written materials, but then there's also some electronic materials as well. And in the written materials, there's review sections as you go through each of the topics. So it's not a whole bunch and then questions. You get questions as you go throughout. And then once, in the way that the study plans are organized, you're working your way through the information strategically and then taking exams as you go throughout the process. So there's kind of a hand-in-hand approach where you're getting the content and then being able to practice strategies for answering questions. And then the questions are not just in the form of the exams, but there's also section quizzes and then domain quizzes. So again, it's very, give you information, have you sort of have that enrichment moment. I liken it a lot to how we learn in elementary school, where you get, a lesson and then a few minutes for enrichment, right? Or some exercise to really apply it. So it goes back and forth in that way. And then towards the end, as you begin to take the mock exams, the idea there is, of course, to see what is your content knowledge and, how is it improved, but then also at that point to be very intentional about applying strategy and not to forget that, what do they say, G.I. Joe, like knowing is half the game or whatever, that's knowing is half the battle, right? It's half the battle. And that's true. So content is half the battle, but then the other half is being strategic and being able to apply those strategies in that moment as you lead up to taking the exam. And like I said, depending on your time frame, the study programs are offered in a way that can match whatever that is and align with that. So you'll still be able to get through all of the information in an organized fashion. I think that's another benefit to the study program approach, is that it's organized, and not just that you can go through the domains, but then even with those questions and how all that lines up.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's wonderful. And having used AATBS, something that I love is that they kind of incorporate all different learning styles. Yes. So someone that I like the physical book, like holding on to something and highlighting, but then you also have the audio versions of it. And like you were saying, the tests in between just help you. Because I was surprised with the assessment test when I took it initially, because I had thought certain areas were my weaknesses and certain were my strengths. And of course, when you take that, you kind of get a better idea. And I think that helps give you sort of a,
absolutely. Well, and I want to make sure too, when you said audios too, there's audio lectures that are included as well. So that touches on that learning approach. And then there's also now a 32-hour online workshop piece. And I get to participate in that as well. And basically they're about they range from 2 to 2.5 hour workshops that are focused on each of those different domains. So there's one for abnormal, clinical, ethics, etc. And those are kind of like this format where we interact with the PowerPoint, and then the participants are able to participate in chat and communicate that way. So that's another component that has been really helpful, I think, especially if this is a better learning way. And really, sometimes we just need all of it, right? We want the book, we need the audio, we need all of it. And then there's, of course, flashcards included. And then one of the differences, with Triad, there's also the Taylor study method, which for those who are more of an online only kind of learner who wants it organized in that way, there's that option as well. So there's it's kind of like whatever you need, we can tailor it to make sure that your needs are met.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's great. And on that same lines, how much do the AATBS programs cost for students?
Yes. Okay. So that was the one thing that I was like, oh, I don't know exactly. And the reason why it's probably better, they keep me out of all the money business, right? So, because I was like, give it to them for free. We all want to pass. But I would say that, when someone asked, would you suggest exploring the AATBS website? Absolutely, Madison. get as much information as you can about this whole process.
Right.
AATBS, Triad Behavioral Health in general, has a really cool website, and some ways to connect, just as clinicians and practitioners. But definitely the earlier you get into the kind of group, not stress, don't stress yourself about it, but
Right.
just to be informed, just to, I'm chilling, I don't feel like doing what I need to do, so I'm going to go look at AATBS, definitely. But I would say in terms of the cost of it, there are different packages that have different pricing. So depending on your need and what's appropriate, so yes, Brenda, there's the whole comprehensive, you get everything, coaching, etc. And then some people are like, I just need the test, or I just need this. And it all depends on your learning approach and your learning style, and what's the best approach for that. And then I know that there are also various discounts, even depending on the institutions that you attend. We have some affiliate programs that we have even been able to embed some of these study materials into particular programs where it's actually in the class, the actual classwork and requirements of classes. So with those programs, those students automatically get discounts to the study material. So I would definitely check it out. And then I know with the various holidays coming, things like that, there's different sales that happen. So I don't know that specifically, but I will say it definitely is an additional cost in life, right? Like everything is another cost, another cost, another cost on top of the exam and on top of, and just as you navigate through this, be realistic about what you need, right? So obviously we want to work within what we can afford, but if what you can afford is going to be the bare minimum and not even get you, then it's like, let's rethink this and see if there's another approach. So I would just be open, and I'm not trying to like sell it or anything, but just literally like whatever the program is, just know that it's another step, but we all have to do it. And you'll get there. And then when you're licensed and practicing, it won't even matter.
Absolutely. Yeah, And just to plug in with AATBS has a virtual booth. So if anyone's interested with the pricing, between 3 and 5 p.m. today, do stop by and ask those questions. They're offering a 10% discount for all those who are attending the event today. And Michele has the code on the chat. So it's DECTW. So there is a 10% off today. And also for all the TogetherWell members, you get a 20% off your exam prep materials from AATBS.
Okay.
So there is, and like Dr. Stanton says, anything counts towards that discount. So I would take advantage of those.
Yeah,
great. Now moving on to something more with your experience, Dr. Stanton, what would be some professional and personal barriers that you experienced when preparing for licensure?
Dr. Narayan, one of the biggest barriers, funny enough, I think one of the biggest barriers to preparation is social media. And this is something that just over time, and I do a lot of coaching with people that are preparing, and there's always this like angst that comes along with and there's groups that are super helpful, like EPPP study groups and all that are super helpful. They have, archives of documents that people have created to help study. But I would say don't be derailed by other people's experiences from social media, from colleagues, from people that you went to school with, etc. This is your own experience. And so, and I say that because there's people who are like, oh, I've taken the test, so many times. And you read that and you're like, oh my gosh, like that's going to be me. And it's like, everyone has a different path. It just varies. And the biggest thing I would say is, in terms of barriers, is to be informed. And because that's what happens is, it's like, oh, I didn't know this. I didn't know my hours had to be on this form, or I had to be this or that. And it's just, because we're the only ones that are responsible. We wish that we could, look at our graduate program director or whatever and be like, why didn't you tell me this? But it's on us. And so just being very informed so that as those hurdles come, because it's usually something we just didn't know. And then it's like, so just being informed as much as possible. And then using our own skills to navigate some of those barriers as well, right? So there's going to be the person who's not helpful when you ask the question at the board or at the testing site or and not to let those, because we're already emotional enough trying to prepare for this exam. So just in terms of like, let me not get upset, like give this person their space to do whatever they got to do.
Right.
And I think the other, in terms of personal barrier, is the things that we tell ourselves, and if we are telling ourselves from the start, I have to pass this exam on the first time, I have to get a score that, whatever, I want a 700 or I want a 650 or I want to, we set these what we might call goals for ourselves, but they turn into being ways for us to tell ourselves lies, right? And it's like, you don't have to pass on the first time. That's ideal. And that's, of course, what we're shooting for, of course.
Right.
But to come into every single study process, so you're sitting down, okay, I got to pass. Like, no, you don't. No, you don't. You're just going to have to take it again. And just to know that, I feel like people who come in with it, like, I don't care how many times I have to take this exam, I'm passing this exam, they're more likely to do well than the person who is like so pressuring themselves. If you think about our emotional brain and our reasoning brain, right? Our amygdala and frontal lobe, they're not on at the same time. And so we know that, right? This is our own field. We know this information, so we need to use it to our advantage with some of these personal barriers, which are really mental barriers. And no one in your circle is going to understand how important this is. Everyone in your circle is going to say, oh, you're going to pass. Don't worry about it. You'll do great. You always do good in school. And that is so frustrating because you're like, oh my gosh, they have no idea. And no, they don't. Of course they don't. But we don't need to expect that, right? We know that. So it's kind of just taking what we would probably give as advice to someone else who's preparing for the exam as our own, and just being, tell ourselves the truth. I look at it like, this is the book of your life. If at the end of the book, you are a licensed clinician, then that's happening. No matter how many times you have to read the page over again, the end of the book doesn't change. You don't, unless you change your book. You could decide you're going to law school, you're done with this, going to go to business, whatever. But if you're on the path of being a licensed clinician, that's the path. And this is just a part of the path. So I think just coming into it with, I'm going to do this, I got this, and telling yourself, yes, you're going to pass, be positive about it. Mindset, again, that other half of the battle is really key to those barriers. And it does get lonely. It's a very, again, because you're kind of the only one, but it's also very empowering in that way too. And then when it's done, you forget literally like all the drama and all, it doesn't even matter. And one thing is that no one on earth asks you, hey, what was your life? What'd you get on the exam? Nobody has ever asked, so how many times did you have to take it? Nobody cares because it doesn't matter. It just pass. That's it. So get a 500.
That's so true. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's so great to highlight the self-talk, because that's something that I see a lot. And even when I do work with the postdocs at my workplace, is also to let them know this does not reflect anything on how good of a clinician you are. Because sometimes you kind of internalize that to be a reflection of how you work with your clientele. And the EPPP and that really it's not a reflection. So that's such a great reminder to focus on that self-talk while you're preparing. Yeah. Thank you so much for that.
I often say that, there's psychology in the real world, and then there's psychology in the EPPP world.
Right.
And they don't always line up, right? And so just to keep that in mind, definitely it's not a reflection of who you are or your ability as a clinician. It's just a matter of, can you pass this version of the EPPP that you were given? That's it.
Exactly. Absolutely. Yeah. And reflecting back, what do you wish someone told you about this licensure process that would have made it easier?
It's actually, I was very, very blessed to be able to work with the company as I was going through my graduate program. So I was an intern working with some of this material early on, and then just being able to be a part of this EPPP kind of preparation world. So early on, I was told, and so as I read that question too, I was like, well, actually, I was told something that made it very easy from the beginning. And it was part of what you just said as well, that this is not a reflection of me in terms of my ability or who I am, and to detach from that. And then just the statement was actually that the smartest person studying for the exam knows to study hard enough to get a C. And I was like, wow, I never thought about it like that. And it was like, because that's really all that matters. So get to there and that's it. And just, again, knowing that it's mindset, this information, a lot of it, yes, will be brand new because we don't all have stuff in IO and those areas. But I also think that what's been really helpful, and I guess as I think about another encouragement that I was given early on, was that at the end of this, you are a doctor, right? Like, I am Dr. Stanton. And when people look at me and people come into my office, they have the expectation that I can help them with anything, right? Anything mental health related. I mean, or other stuff too, but it's not like, oh, well, is it just this approach or this? And so one thing about the EPPP that helped early on is, as I encounter this information that to me seemed frivolous, right? Or to a lot of people, they're like, why do I have to know this? Why do I need to know? I'm never going to talk to somebody about this. And it's like, well, you never know. You never know. And you're taking the responsibility to say, I know all of this stuff, come to me and I'm going to be able to help you. So as you go through some of these pieces of information and it seems like, oh, it's so much. Yes, because at the end of this, you get to be the person that someone comes to and you will know. I mean, there's been a few times that I was like speaking to someone, and as I'm saying it, thinking to myself, I am actually saying something that was on the EPPP. Like, this is where I learned it from. I didn't learn this in school, some arbitrary, and it was just like, wow, who knew? So it's pretty cool. And I just be encouraged by that. There's light at the end of the tunnel, and it's happening. This is happening. It's just let's do it.
Yeah. Great, Dr. Stanton. Believe it or not, we're come to the end of our segment here.
This has been great.
I think just final thoughts on maybe how do you see the current pandemic changing anything when it comes to the EPPP process, and final thoughts for the audience?
Yes, thank you. Well, just quickly about the COVID changes, et cetera. As I mentioned, it does decrease the availability of spaces, et cetera, and testing sites. So planning for that, and then also planning, or not planning, but just being okay with the fact that things may shift abruptly. There were many people who are ready to take the exam, and then something will happen in their state or in their city and it shuts down. And so just to be okay, kind of that go with the flow kind of piece in terms of these things that are changing. And then also just being thoughtful of the fact that sometimes our physical things can affect the way we study or learn or even perform. So if wearing a mask is a challenge, right? Because some people, it very much is a challenge. Yes. I would at some point practice with that, because that is going to be something that, and just to know ahead of time what some of those protocols are, so that you're not super anxious when you get there because you don't know what, what I mean? Like, just be informed. And if you could even go to the test site, drive to it, see what it is, and do that so that you know what's happening there. And then lastly, just knowing that even if you just consider not just the pandemic, but with social media, things like that, you watch the news, it's very clear that everywhere in our nation is in a state of need when it comes to mental health. So as we get irritated by our, what's happening, this is so stupid, oh my gosh, well, let that be your motivation to buckle down and study, because we need you. Right? We need professionals who really care about human beings and wellness to be in the trenches to help people to get through this. And so let that be your motivation, and just know you can do it. If I can do it, you can do it.
Beautiful. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Stanton. You guys I can't wait to do this again.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for representing us on AATBS. I think we need more psychologists there. And thank you so much for being there, and amazing pearls of wisdom today. Thank you, Dr. Stanton.
Thank you very much. See you guys soon.